But the Democratic response went beyond words and also included actions. For example, in 1956, Democratic Governor Allen Shivers of Texas deployed the Texas Rangers to keep blacks from entering schools in Mansfield. The following year, 1957, Democratic Governor Orville Faubus of Arkansas called out the National Guard to keep black students from entering Central High School in Little Rock. However, Republican President Dwight D. Eisenhower quickly intervened, and he federalized the Arkansas National Guard to take it away from Governor Faubus. Eisenhower then replaced the Arkansas Guard with 1,200 troops from the elite 101st Airborne Division, ordering them to protect the 9 black students who had chosen to go to Central High. Democrats in the U.S. Senate strongly protested against Eisenhower's actions to protect these black students. Georgia Democratic Governor Marvin Griffin also attacked Eisenhower's actions and promised that as long as he held office, he would, quote, maintain segregation in the schools and the races will not be mixed come hell or high water, end quote. Meanwhile, in Arkansas, Democratic Governor Faubus, unable to prevent black students from attending school because of the federal protection they had received, simply shut down the schools for the next year to prevent further attendance. And Virginia Democratic Governor James Almond, like other Southern Democratic governors, also shut down public schools rather than permit black students to attend. In 1960 in Louisiana, where Democratic Governor Jimmy Davis supported segregation, it required 4 federal marshals to accompany little Ruby Bridges so she could attend a public elementary school in New Orleans. So deep-seated was the racism among Southern Democratic leaders that when the 1964 Civil Rights Bill became law, Lester Maddox, who became Democratic Governor of Georgia, sold the fast food business that he owned rather than serve blacks in his restaurant. And in 1960, Mississippi Democratic Governor Hugh White even requested that evangelist Billy Graham segregate his crusades, something Graham refused to do. In fact, when South Carolina Democratic Governor George Timmerman learned that Billy Graham had invited African Americans to a Reformation rally at the South Carolina State Capitol, he promptly denied use of the facilities to the evangelist. Some Democratic Southern governors did work for integration, including Tennessee Governor Frank Clement, Florida Governor Leroy Collins, and Kentucky Governor Happy Chandler. But these tended to be the exceptions among Southern Democratic governors rather than the rule, and their admirable behavior was clearly overshadowed by the negative behavior of the others. Democratic leaders long stood in the doorways of schoolhouses and told black children, "We don't want you in here to get the good education that our children are getting." Today, as many black students have become mired in urban schools that are often failing or deteriorating, Democrats are once again standing in the doorway. Consider the situation in Washington, D.C., where 84% of the city's students are black, despite the fact that nearly $13,500 is spent each year on every student in the district, an amount almost twice the national average of $7,500 per student. D.C. schools currently rank among the worst of all schools in the nation. Congress therefore moved to provide help by providing a $7,500 voucher for low-income students who are trapped in failing schools, a voucher they can redeem to attend a better school, a school chosen by that student and his or her parents. When that congressional proposal came to a vote, only 1% of Democrats in Congress supported vouchers and parental choice in education, even though nationally, nearly 70% of African Americans with children support educational choice. While Democrats once stood in the doorways of public schools and told black students, "We don't want you in here," they're again standing in the doorways of public schools, this time telling black students that they don't want them out, that they want them to remain in failing schools. It appears that for a century and a half, Democrats have often taken wrong positions on educational opportunity for black Americans. Returning back to the 19th century, Representative John Roy Lynch, a congressman from Mississippi, was mentioned earlier. He had grown up as a slave until freed by the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. Within a decade, he had become Speaker of the House in Mississippi and later received presidential appointments from Republican Presidents Benjamin Harrison and William McKinley. Lynch was appointed an Army officer during the Spanish-American War, earned a law degree, and was the chairman of the Republican Party in Mississippi. He was a leader who served his state and his nation well. In 1884, John Roy Lynch became the first black American to preside over a national political convention. the Republican National Convention in Chicago. Lynch's love for his country was still very evident and reflected the patriotism still evident among African Americans today.
I love the land that gave me birth. I love the stars and stripes. This country is where I intend to live, where I expect to die, to preserve the honor of the national flag and to maintain perpetually the union of the states. Hundreds, and I may say thousands of noble, brave, and true-hearted colored men have fought, bled, and died.
While Lynch was the first black American to preside over a national political convention, he was not the last. U.S. Senator Edward Brooke presided over the 1968 National Republican Convention, and Representative J.C. Watts presided over the 2000 National Republican Convention. While 3 black Americans have presided over national conventions for Republicans, to date, Democrats have never had a black American preside over any of their national Democratic conventions. A further indication that the Democrats were well known for their bloody atrocities against blacks is seen in this illustration from Harper's Weekly showing the major elements and influences of the Democratic Party. The illustration shows the various banners under which Democrats gathered, and those banners included the Stars and Bars carried by Confederate soldiers, the pro-slavery banner, the Ku Klux Klan banner, the New York Rioters banner, referring to the massive riots instigated against blacks by the Democrats in New York, leading to the killing and injuring of as many as 1,000 citizens. And finally, the Democratic banner of repudiation, referring to the Democrats' opposition to paying the national debt incurred in putting down the Southern pro-slavery rebellion. These were the various movements led by Democrats, and Americans in that day knew what Democrats stood for. By the 1880s, a movement called Southern Redemption had begun in earnest. Southern Redemption was a political movement to redeem the South from the Reconstruction Acts and the civil rights laws passed by Republicans, laws and acts that Southern Democrats believed threatened their version of a Southern society. The best way for the Democratic legislatures to redeem their state was to deprive black Americans of their political rights through the passage of state laws that restricted, removed, or even blatantly violated their civil rights, as well as through the prompt repeal of state laws that had suppressed Klan violence. Representative John Roy Lynch, who not only had helped pass the original federal civil rights laws, but who also witnessed their subsequent violation at the state level throughout the period of Southern Redemption, accurately noted,
"The opposition to civil rights in the South is confined almost exclusively to states under Democratic control."
Democrats understood how important it was to their survival to prevent blacks from voting. In fact, this illustration from that period shows an allegory of the Bible story of Samson, who lost his strength when his hair was cut. In the picture, you see that the woman has used her razor, called the Lost Cause Regained, to cut the black Samson's hair and cause him to lose his strength. And what is his hair? His strength? It is called suffrage, or voting. With the strength, or the vote, of black Americans removed, you see the various Democratic groups and leaders rejoicing in the background, including Confederates, the KKK, pro-slavery forces, and various famous Democratic leaders of that day, including General Nathan Bedford Forrest, who headed the Ku Klux Klan. By the way, notice the phrase, the Democratic barbecue, and that Democrats are burning various books in the foreground, including the Holy Bible. As this illustration confirms, limiting black voting became the major goal for Southern Democrats. Given the explicit federal voting protections that had been established by the 14th and 15th Amendments and by the numerous federal civil rights laws, it was no easy task for Democrats to circumvent these protections. It required devious and cunning methods, and Southern Democratic legislatures implemented almost a dozen separate devices to keep blacks from voting. The first device was the poll tax, a fee paid by a voter before he could vote. The fee was high enough that most poor were unable to pay the tax and therefore were unable to vote. And while some Southern whites were poor, nearly all Southern blacks were poor, having just emerged from slavery and not yet having established an independent means of living.